And I'm going to keep going with this thing, and hopefully it is a message that can get people inspired to do something that they're capable of doing, because we all have certain gifts. There are expectations for all of us, and we are capable of doing amazing things with the power of God and with the idea that we have a purpose.
All sorts of different ways in which faith communities are making a difference. Frankly, we've oftentimes come to the conclusion that they actually are doing a better job in some respects than even some of the government programs, because they include the whole person in the conversation. So I thought this would be a very good reason to talk about this new book. Came out earlier this month, Heaven Help Us, How Faith Communities Inspire Hope, Strengthen Neighborhoods, and Build the Future. 15 chapters in this book. We'll pick out about a handful of those that I thought were of interest, but you are welcome to ask other questions. It is written by the former governor of the state of Ohio, John Kasich, and he is an individual that has, of course, served in Congress, has served as governor. He also ran for the presidency in 2016. Today he runs the Kasich Company and is best known for many of his best-selling books. Courage is Contagious, Two Paths, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's Up to Us. And, of course, this book we'll talk about today, Heaven Help Us, which has just come out. And you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have a link so that you can get it in hardback and on Kindle. So, Governor, thank you so much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Let's we can talk about your first book. Came out in your introduction 25 years ago. Courage is Contagious, Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things to Change the Face of America. That was, of course, the bestseller. But then later on in your introduction, you say, in some respects, Heaven Help Us closes the circle of what you set out to do in that first book. And then you said, actually, it doesn't so much close it as it opens it up. But this is really your desire to point out that these faith communities are having a very profound impact, and one of the reasons you've written so much about them.
Well, Kerby, this is actually my second faith book. My first one was called Every Other Monday, and it's a story that traces a Bible study that got started, I helped start in 1987, and it still goes on today. But this book is sort of like the first one, except what I realized is that our faith institutions offer sort of a clubhouse for people to take their great ideas on providing some healing in our country, whether it's human trafficking or poverty or homelessness or whatever it may be. And because you're now in a place where you can have material support, psychological support, more people helping you, it's easier to transform things in that setting than it is if you're trying to do it all by yourself. And that's why I insisted that it be a celebration, not just of the works, but also of the institutions that can help you to achieve your goals.
You know, one of the individuals we've had on this program in the past, when he was alive, of course he's passed on now, was Rodney Stark, professor at Baylor University. And he and some others have actually tried to run some numbers, some calculations on the benefits that come to the communities, to society, really to government as large, because when governments are trying to do something, of course, they're hamstringed in a variety of different ways, but faith-based communities that are doing soup kitchens, they're doing counseling programs, they're having an outreach to the homeless. I mean, he calculated the net benefit to the government and to society at large in the billions of dollars, and I think most people have forgotten about that, and that's why I was so excited about your book.
Well, Kerby, that's, the other thing that's interesting is when people approach government, whether it's adoption, whether it is literacy, it doesn't matter, any host of things, or schools for that matter. If the faith community wants to show their faith, not by what they say, but what they do, it's amazing how you can get government to be open to the fact that they need help. And in the process of that, of course, you bring about significant change. And at the same time, people are living their faith. And we can get the government to understand that the faith community is, somehow not an obstacle or an enemy to them. And it's been pretty interesting for me to see how that works. And, the prison ministry, you mentioned it in the intro. When I ran the state, we had a very robust prison ministry. and we also taught skills, and we had one of the lowest recidivism rates, in the country. You give people skills, you give them hope, you give them something to cling to, and it can work out. And so you're exactly right.
And again, we've talked about some of the prison ministries and all that. I thought we might begin, and you even end, with a shooting. And the first chapter, which again, I might just mention, Governor, we have quite a number of listeners in places like South Carolina, but whether you lived in South Carolina or not, you probably remember the story of this 21-year-old individual attended a Bible study at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Of course, we don't mention the individual's name. You don't either. And the sad commentary of that was, I think, very powerful because you title that first chapter Forgiveness, and you really tell us a very important story that we need to learn.
Well, you are exactly right, Kerby. It's a well-known story, and, some people said, well, why do you need to include it? Because it's an amazing story about forgiveness. And, where 9 people were murdered in a Bible study, and during the arraignment, they all went and said, we forgive the shooter, which is astounding. And it traces this whole process of forgiveness from the beginning to what happens when more time passes and how do you feel. But I like the area of forgiveness because we all need it in one way or another. We need people to forgive us. We need to forgive others. And you think about families that have been torn apart over stupid little things, right? It can happen. And I've experienced some of it myself. And the idea that you can say, I'm sorry, or I forgive you. One of my friends, he had a brother that really took care of their father and did all the hard work, and they were not speaking. And I told my friend Barney, I said, Barney, call up your brother and tell him that you're sorry you didn't do more and that you hope he'll forgive you. He said it's just restored the whole relationship. So forgiveness was really, really important, and I'm glad I put that chapter in there, and there's a lot we can learn about it.
I might just mention that so often we've talked about the importance of forgiveness. We've had Max Lucado in studio a couple of times, and one of his books was on this issue of forgiveness. But this very powerful story is one. By the end, the 15th chapter is on remembrance. It has to do with another shooting. But while we're talking about forgiveness, I think the one out of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church is one, but also the one with the Amish, that shooting that took place there is just another example, Governor, of the power of forgiveness and really the need for us to maybe use those as role models for our children and grandchildren.
Yes, there's no question about it. And forgiveness is hard, but I went through it myself when it involved a man who was a drunk driver who killed my mother and father. And for a while, I didn't have any forgiveness in me. And then I realized, well, wait a minute. And different than South Carolina, I came to the conclusion if the guy could turn the clock back, he would. And so I was able to kind of move beyond it.
One of the chapters I did want to jump to is about the convoy of hope. You call it the Horse Whisperer. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up is every year when I drive to speak at Kennecott, and I do stuff at the Kennecott Institute, I drive right by in Springfield, Missouri, the Convoy of Hope. It's an enormous organization. I'm sorry to say we have not done an interview with them, although I think your book has inspired me to do so. And you've got a whole chapter about an organization that people should know about, just like they know Samaritan's Purse and a variety of others. Can you tell us more?
Well, Kerby, it's so amazing. It's one of the problems with the book is when people read about this, they say, I'm not capable of doing what Hal Donaldson did. He grew up in a very dire circumstance, decided he wanted to go to college and make something of himself, and he did. And he became a ghostwriter. He met Mother Teresa, and she said to him, "What are you doing to change the world?" He flew home after meeting her, called his buddies, and they drove around in a pickup truck with a couple bags of groceries and gave this food out to people. Today, he's feeding over 500,000 people every single day. He goes to many of the places where, storms or tragedies have hit, and he works with local churches to try to bring not just temporary but permanent relief. And it's just a remarkable story. It is number 32, I think, on the list of charities. And Hal Donaldson is just a remarkable man, and I would encourage you to have him because he's extremely humble. He's an incredible calling, and Kerby, it's a story that is just hard to believe.
Let's give some of the numbers because, at least in your book, you talk about 571,000 children worldwide are fed each day. Of course, right now, we've tried occasionally to focus on some of the outreach into places like Ukraine and a variety of other places, have served more than 250 million people. And again, maybe you get back to the old, maybe it's one of the best kept secrets in the humanitarian area, because I've been very impressed by, as I've learned more about it. And then I was even more encouraged to see what we could do to give it some visibility here on radio, simply because you wrote about it in your book.
Well, I'm delighted for that, but let me tell you something. You've got to get Hal on here, and I've been with him, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, and he's invited me to go to Central America to see some of what he's doing there.
Yes.
When you think about it, it's hard to believe that he went from a bag of groceries in the back of a pickup
yes.
to what he's able to achieve today. And listen, he's getting more and more well known. He's had presidents go over there and talk to people who are involved in it. But he relies on local churches. He will not go somewhere to solve a problem if he doesn't have some church there that can carry on the work that he's trying to do. It's really remarkable.
Well, again, that chapter is entitled The Hope Whisperer. It's all about Hal, and we'll see if we can get him on, and my producers listen to it, so I'm sure that will happen. Let me maybe get into the fact that most of the focus of what we do here at Point of View is Christian, but there have been some very good interfaith kinds of outreaches. So one of your chapters talks about what's happening in Omaha, Nebraska.
Isn't that amazing, Kerby? It's an amazing story, isn't it? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll let you finish the story because you obviously have enthusiasm about that, and I just thought it's one that I've never really heard about before until I read your book.
Well, there is a gentleman who he basically had a dream, and he was in a position where he couldn't let go of the dream. I don't know, Kerby, whether you've had a dream and you've written it down and try to remember it. Well, he did, and he kept writing and writing and remembering. And he went to his congregation, and he talked to them about this dream he had, Bob Freeman, and he was one of the leaders in the congregation, doesn't consider himself to be particularly religious, but he kept pursuing this, and his idea was to get a plot of land and locate a church, a synagogue, and a mosque on the same piece of property with a community center where there could be interfaith discussions and inspiration. It took him 15 years. And what was interesting is when he first came up with the idea, he was able to get a mosque to participate. His biggest problem was getting a Christian church to participate, but he ultimately found one, and now they are located in Omaha. And it's funny, I was on a train the other day, headed from New York to Washington, and there was a woman on the train from Omaha, and I asked her if she knew about this place, this interfaith operation. She didn't, because she doesn't really live in Omaha anymore, but she texted her parents, and they said, oh, we know exactly where it is. It's fantastic. So that's a dream come true, 15 years, and a remarkable story.
Well, again, and we're talking about the fact that you basically have all 3 of those, a synagogue, a mosque, and a church. And if I remember right, I think this was all finished just about the time during the pandemic. And that itself is a story, is it not?
Well, I think what is also interesting is there was a time here, of course, where Muslims were under great attack. And that was a synagogue that really stood up, the rabbi did, to try to protect, and it's sort of like the story at the very end of the book,
yes.
Which is the murder that occurred in the synagogue.
Right.
And it was the Muslim community that really did GoFundMe. They supported, they were involved in many different ways. So while we may have our disagreements, with some of the strands of the Abrahamic religion, I kind of think God's big enough to kind of take care of stuff, Kerby. That's the way I look at it. And so I wanted to celebrate all of them. And my publisher is Zondervan, a Christian publishing house, and they wanted me to be inclusive, which is exactly what I've done and wanted to do. And the rest of it is the story. Very cool. By the way, I found out about this through Susie Buffett, who is the daughter of Warren Buffett,
Yes.
at a U2 conference. I had worked with Bono and Bobby Shriver, the guy who accompanied him through all he was doing to provide debt relief in Africa for the poorest countries, which then led to PEPFAR, and the vaccination and the medicine provided and saved the lives of millions of people there. It was an amazing story. That's where I met Susie. She directed me to Bob Freeman, and the rest is in this book.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because Warren Buffett, Susie Buffett, Bob Freeman, dream, then trying to pull all that together, and then it really just kind of gets completed during the pandemic. I think it was August 2020, and then some of that opportunity. And again, I think I need to add a disclaimer, and that is there are times when I will join hands with individuals with whom I disagree theologically, maybe even politically, but if we can have a common goal, whether it's in the pro-life community, whether it's a pro-family initiative, whether it's reaching out to the homeless, whether it's a drug program that is going to help people get off of drugs, whatever it might be, I don't have to compromise my theology. As a matter of fact, I see that sometimes as a great witnessing opportunity, quite frankly, when we can work together. And sometimes interfaith ideas have been condemned because we're supposedly compromising our faith. I think those of us that have our strong faith can go into those relationships knowing full well that we might have a great influence for the community and might at the same time share what our particular religious perspective might be with others and do that in a way that I think is beneficial both to the individuals and to society, don't you think?
Yeah, and a good conversation. And, I kind of look at the faith issue being really two things. Love God, which creates humility, love your neighbor. And the great religions believe that, and I think any ability to communicate and discuss where we all are is a positive, and I think the Lord likes that.
Let me just mention there are some great resources you can find out about Heaven Help Us, how faith communities inspire hope, strengthen neighborhoods, and build the future. And you can find all of that at the website at pointofview.net. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more, I'd like to maybe read one of those stories, maybe use this to encourage people in their community to make a difference, I think you would certainly benefit from that. And so we have information about that on our website. John Kasich is with us as we are talking about his book. And again, you can find it in your local bookstore, but we have information about it if you'd like to get it in hardback or Kindle. And Governor, I thought it might be good to bring together a lot of different pieces because we oftentimes, first of all, talk about the power of Christian films and films that are documentaries and the rest. We've also had this filmmaker, Tony Kritz, on the program to talk about the book, Read How God's People Can Bring Justice Through Literacy, and also have talked about the documentary Sentenced. And, of course, it is narrated by NBA champion. Matter of fact, right now we're watching him in the playoffs, Stephen Curry. So this one is what you call the power of partnership.
Exactly. Kerby, the way it worked was Tony just decided that this school operation needed to be cleaned up, and he and his pals from his church and some other churches went and just cleaned up the playground in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And process of this, he wanted to do something that he thought would last a lot longer. So he started this literacy program. And he's a man on fire, as you know. He's spreading this literacy program all across the country. And I'm glad you've had him on. But how cool is it that he got Steph Curry hitting another three for him in this movie that they have? And it's really a terrific thing. And when we think about, okay, we can't be Hal Donaldson, so we can't, feed 500,000 people a day. Well, maybe we can teach a kid how to read, because when kids can't read, they end up in poverty. And Tony maintains that 25% of all people grow up not being able to read by the time they become adults, which is astounding if it's true. I hope it's a little bit exaggerated, but he claims that those are the numbers. So there's no reason for me to really doubt them. But teach a kid to read. My wife has a little mission, Kerby, and I call it a mission. She doesn't think of it that way. She has a thing where she visits what she calls her olds. These are people who are elderly, and she just checks in on them every couple of weeks. They have great joy with her stopping by. She gets great joy from spending time with them. And, that's something simple that everybody can do. Think of if every member of every church had one old that they were connected to, because loneliness, as you know, is one of the great epidemics in America today. So it's a simple thing we can do, and profound, just like Tony's work on literacy.
Well, again, I was just thinking about how churches can think about this. First of all, you have probably in your community people that don't speak English well, so you could have an ESL,
right.
That would be English as a second language program. I know many churches that have that. I know when I was growing up, I volunteered to do tutoring. It wasn't so much in English as it was in mathematics, but again, doing that inner city was very significant, not only to the impact that we were having on those individuals so that they might be able to graduate from high school rather than go out into the streets, but also the impact it had on me. And in some respects, there's a great story of an individual in Oregon, not exactly the foundational place for a lot of places to develop, who nevertheless puts together a book, puts together a film, and gets a notable NBA author, champion, and shooter to actually participate in that regard. And so it really does sometimes show what I would call the power of one. And sometimes if you can't do it individually, then not ask what can I do, but what can we do? I think we have a great deal to benefit from that, and that's why you've entitled that particular chapter, The Power of Partnership.
Exactly. You know, there's one other one, Kerby, because I don't know how much time we'll have that I want to tell you about. And there is a lady who lives in Long Island who has a son, and a lot of people will relate to this. Her son is autistic.
Yes. Okay.
And she is worried about what is going to happen to him when he ages out and they age out. And so she works with her churches and a variety of churches, and she now has created several group homes in Long Island. Now, here in Central Ohio, where I live, there's a woman here who she has an autistic son, and one of her great worries is what's going to happen with him and where is he going to live. It was funny because I was doing an interview with CBN the other day, and the man who was managing the sound for us, he lives in Central Ohio as well. Mm-hmm. And what I told this woman, I said, listen, there is a way for you either to talk to your church, or maybe you should go to church and you can talk to the minister about your great fears about what happens to your son. And perhaps there can be a group home that could be started right here, because we need them all across the country. And the guy running the sound for CBM says, I live here too. If you would introduce me to her, I'd like to work with her to see if we can get something going on that front. Isn't that something?
It is. And again, that, if I remember right, isn't that from a Greek Orthodox congregation that she's part of? Yes. Well, since you mentioned Ohio, let's talk about one that you've known for some time, the founder of Cardinal Health, which is a global health care service, which is headquartered right there in the state in which you were governor, Ohio.
Yeah, this is a story about a guy by the name of Bob Walter who founded it, and he's done very, very well. He's very, very successful. But I have to tell you, Kerby, he's an interesting guy because I would say he's a little bit flinty and sometimes a little bit difficult. He and I have known each other for a long, long time, but I've come to find out that his generosity really has no bounds. And he was introduced to a priest up in one of the really torn up towns in Massachusetts, and started to support this gentleman who was trying to save the town. You know, the textile industry was gone. It was different groups of people, different demographics moving in. And this guy, Paul O'Brien, a really interesting guy and a good guy and a very forceful guy, started a program to feed people in the community. And he's got a new school coming up. He's doing all kinds of amazing things. But one of the things he did is he raised money so that people, when they're hungry, can go into his operation. They have tablecloths and nice settings. They have a waiter who will seat you, and you come in. You don't pay anything. Nobody asks any questions, and you're welcomed. And he's transforming that whole community through feeding people, and at the same time building an even bigger school that can bring such harmony and peace and love to the people in the community.
Just an incredible story. And again, so that involves Father O'Brien as well as, of course, Bob Walter, and just, story after story. But let's maybe pick out one other one that before we take our break, and that is we oftentimes, Governor, spend some time talking about what's wrong with and some of the concerns about the foster care system. And so there's a chapter there about radical hospitality and really talking about adoption and foster care and what we can do in a community. Sometimes the argument is, well, it's so broken and the government's running it, there's nothing we as individuals can do. And you really have a different aspect of that you tell in that story in one of the chapters.
Well, they actually, the federal government actually has welcomed in the faith community in helping to fix the foster system, to bring some joy. Look, I've got some notes here, 31,000 volunteers who are mobilized. There have been 98 makeovers of Department of Human Services visitation rooms in Oregon. Ben Sands, who I had been working with, just contacted me. I urged him to go to Kentucky because these foster care programs are all under review. He is down there now. He emailed me the other day saying it's working. Listen to this, 919 hours of respite provided through Foster Parents Night Out. And these people started all this in Oregon, and here's the funny thing, Kerby, you mentioned the other day, maybe not the center of all this, but when you look at it, you got Juliana Goebel and Ben Sand, and you got your friend Tony Chris. They're all operating out of Portland. So maybe God's alive and well there in Portland,
It's a good line. Again, I only use that because having a wife from there and having traveled there once a year at least to teach, when I go to Vermont, that's, I think, now the least religious religious state, and I think Oregon used to be the least religious, now second least religious, and yet here we can see some faith-based organizations out of that. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about, again, how some of these faith communities can help in the midst of tragedy. In one case, a hurricane. In another case, a shooting. And I think you will benefit from that. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read the rest of these stories, because you're only covering part of the 15 that are there, Heaven Help Us is the title of the book, How Faith Communities Inspire Hope, Strengthen Neighborhoods, and Build the Future. And if you'd like to know a little bit more, of course, we have all the links necessary on the website at pointofview.net. And thought we would pull together one story from early in your book, one that you end your book with, because it gets into how these faith communities respond to a crisis. The first one has to do with Naples, Florida. You've gone to St. John's Episcopal Church there in Naples. But going back to basically September 2022, you had a Category 4 storm surge, and that was from Hurricane Ian. And down even a little bit further, you also had a Category 4 storm that actually had hit Hurricane Irma. And so the crisis that strikes, in this case, Florida, with these occasional hurricanes, is certainly devastating, but also has become, Governor, an opportunity for ministry, hasn't it?
Well, yes. My wife and I were occasionally visiting Naples, and we found this church, St. John's Episcopal Church, and we were going to it. And one Sunday we went, after we'd been gone a long time, and we went in to try to get to the inside the sacristy of the church, and everything was locked up. And then they said they directed us out onto a patio, and they had moved the church services. By the way, the entire church had been flooded. And here's the irony thing: on the altar, there were fish that had kind of washed up onto the altar. Believe it or not, is that ironic, Kerby? And
wow.
Anyway, they were figuring out how they were going to have to rebuild the church, but at the same time, they had a lot of mission partners, people who provided shoes for kids that didn't have shoes, things like that. And they raised $200,000 to give to their mission partners, never took a break. And now, because of the efforts they've made, all these groups match the kind of money that St. John's Episcopal raises. And this thing's just taken off like crazy. I was there on Easter Sunday in the morning, and the pastor, Joe Miyoko, actually had a copy of Heaven Help Us, and I was flabbergasted, but he held it up and talked about it, included it in part of his sermon. So it's a really great story and a really great church, and I'm glad that I I found it, plain and simple. So they took care of themselves. At the same time, they took care of others.
And a good illustration of that is that sometimes we look to the government for solutions, and certainly the government can really provide those when things are just so devastated. But it has been striking to me, whether you look at Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, whether you look at the fires that were in Southern California, whatever tragedy you might want to pick, it has been amazing and encouraging to see how many times faith-based organizations have actually stepped in and made a difference. And this is why when sometimes you see this sort of resident hostility to and residual hostility towards religious ideas from people in government or from secularists, they fail to understand the kind of positive impact that they're having. And I think that's why I'm very encouraged by your book. But let's, if we can, wind down, because you began...
partnership. One other thing, Kerby.
Go for it.
That is a partnership between the faith organizations and the government is truly effective because, in these storm-hit areas, FEMA plays a major role. And so I think a partnership is what works really well, and for everybody to kind of collaborate, because it's the people we're trying to help, and that's what it's all about.
Well, and I think of, Edmund Burke used to talk about the little platoons that were part of our society. In some respects, churches and faith-based organizations are kind of those little platoons. But just in the interest of time, let's get to the last one. You began, of course, we talked about the forgiveness story that we talked about through AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Now you end with a chapter dealing with the horrific shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue, which took place October 27th, 2018. And in some respects, you've started with a conversation about forgiveness. This one really is a discussion about remembrance. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, they decided that they were going to keep everything that was connected to that horrible day, and the outpouring of support that came from communities all over the world, and everything. I mean, I've been in that museum. I've looked at the kind of artwork that was sent to them by children across the world, and I mean, you see this stuff, it's so emotional. You can't help but have a good cry about how the world came to regard that tragedy and somehow to relate that tragedy to themselves, and what it is that they felt such deep grief for the people who had experienced it, but maybe in some respects realized something like that could potentially affect all of them. And so there was a great outpouring of an institution, faith in God, and people across the globe, again, responded to it. And it's an amazing story, Kerby. I want to tell you that this is my 6th book that I've written, and somehow I feel like the wind is under my wings. It's just lifting me to try to do something good. And to put this book out there has just been a total joy. And being able to talk as a Christian about the love of Christ and our ability to collaborate with others who have love for God it's just been great. And I'm going to keep going with this thing, and hopefully it is a message that can get people inspired to do something that they're capable of doing, because we all have certain gifts. There are expectations for all of us, and we are capable of doing amazing things with the power of God and with the idea that we have a purpose. And that's what Heaven Help Us is all about.
Well, again, you've done a great job. And closing thoughts about the exclamation point that punctuates our faith. And again, as I've said so often, Governor, sometimes people say, what can I do? And I said, first of all, I think you read through the book and see the power of one. But sometimes you might say, okay, there's not much I can do, but you can maybe change the pronoun. What can we do? When we gather together, we exercise our faith, we can really make a difference. And that's really what the book Heaven Help Us is all about. So I appreciate you joining us today here on Point of View.
I loved it. Kirby, thank you so much, and good luck, and God bless your mission.
Let me just mention again that there's information about the book on the website, pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.